This is Roll Call for this edition of African Drums. The African drums are sounding.
Good evening. Welcome to this week's edition of African Drums, the television organ of the Cuffy 250 Committee, an organization dedicated to the empowerment of the African Guyanese community through education and the empowerment of self-activity. I am Elsie Harry, and I will be your host for this evening's program. Today is Father's Day, a day that is universally set aside to honor our fathers, including our mothers, who more than often have to shoulder the responsibilities of fatherhood. On today's edition of African Drums, we want to focus not so much on the question of fatherhood, but on the condition of males in our society, in particular, the black males. We know that from the time of slavery through colonial society to the present, the black male has been the subject of particular attention by the state and the elites. Today, it is no secret that black males continue to face many of the challenges of yesteryear. They still disproportionately face organized violence at the expense of the state and are still generally viewed with suspicion and scorn by custodians of official power, including those in our own ethno-racial group. So, is it accurate to assert then that in Guyana, black males, especially poor young black males, are in very bad shape? Or are we exaggerating the problem? Is officialdom still institutionally biased against black males? Or is it, as some would argue, that black males are their own worst enemy? If we conclude that things are really that bad, then what can or should be done to arrest the drift, to change the situation? Does the solution lie exclusively with the black males, or is the larger society an equal partner? These questions cry out for discussion, if not answers. And that is what we will be doing this evening on this edition of African Drums. Of course, we have assembled a competent team of commentators. Norwell Hinds is a young professional and youth activist and a former host of African Drums. Nicole is a women's and child's rights activist, and Nigel Hughes, who will be joining us a little later, is a prominent attorney and political leader. Welcome to the show, Nicole and Norwell.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you very much for having us.
Okay, to begin the discussion, I'd like to ask each of you to discuss the agony and the ecstasy of the black males in contemporary Guyanese society from your own perspectives as son and, of course, as a mother and a child's rights activist.
First of all, happy Father's Day to all fathers, and of course to the mothers who are doing double duties. Not that they can replace the father in the child's life, but in the fact that they're trying their best. To begin the discussion, we have to go historically back into what happened to the black man and the black woman, because we cannot discuss the black male without discussing the black female. And slavery has left an indelible mark upon us as a group. Hence, one of the things that would have been destroyed is our sense of family. And the family is the foundation of every society. It is families that run businesses. It is family that run the nation. And what struck me on a visit to Jamaica, the Emancipation Park, there's this huge, two huge statues of a woman and a man, but they're naked. And you can see their nakedness. Everything is shown. Looking deeper into the artwork, what you recognize there is that their nakedness represents what has happened to us in our journey here to South America, in that we were stripped of everything, our languages, our name, our culture, our sense of self. And so in discussing the agony and ecstasy as it relates to the African male, we must first start with the historical perspective. That does not say that we cannot triumph over such adversity, because our ancestors showed us by buying villages. One of the greatest things I would have taught my son, who is 21, is that ancestors pooled their monies, they got together, and they bought villages. It is still there today standing. And if the African male is to be relevant in today's society, he must return to the teachings of the ancestors. They've shown the way. I thank you.
Thank you, Nicole. Norwell.
Well, thank you for having me as well.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Nicole, for wishing me Happy Father's Day.
God bless you.
So I think that Nicole gave a good perspective there. First of all, you know, grounding it to thinking the historical underpinnings of the conversations. Even as we look at the contemporary African male, the Guyanese male today, we have to look at that historical root, and we have to look at, you know, the family and marriages were only permitted, and you had this on your show last week, I think, with
Yes.
Guyana in 1825. That's significant in itself. So when we look at Guyana society today and we see the condition of the African male, the African male achieves, but there are also cases where the African male is not achieving and needs support. I think a large extent the conversation has to also look at the role of socialization, the role of men and women, boys and girls, structural issues which affect or sometimes disaffect young males. So as we look at the agony and the ecstasy, I thought it was an interesting use of words. That on the one hand, we're saying that yes, there are those high points of male achievement in the Guyanese society, and those things have to be celebrated. But at the same time, that the African male is in trouble. And as Nicole said, and I quite concur with it, that we have to begin looking in the community of old, those messages and lessons that were left to us by our ancestors.
Okay, thank you, Norwell. Nigel Hughes, attorney and political leader, has just joined us, and we'd like you to weigh in on this question, Nigel, of discussing the ecstasy and agony of the black males in contemporary Guyanese society. From your perspective, of course, as a professional and, of course, as a father.
First of all, my apologies. I literally just came from Bobby, I was doing all kinds of strange things there. So forgive the paint marks. Tough question. Agony, I think the African male is definitely in crisis. That goes without saying. I didn't hear, I came in halfway on Nicole's presentation on it. And I have to agree that the historic examples that we have are excellent ones to follow. Of course, they have to be adapted to contemporary times. I think it may be an explanation, but not an excuse. I really believe that the crises that we African males find ourselves in essentially is, despite the historic challenges that we've had, we have not faced them. I was at a presentation last night in the Theatre Guild, some young poets dealing with this issue of single parent homes and lack of responsibility by the young African male. Excellent presentations, the effort and some others. But I believe what has happened to the African male, especially in contemporary Guyanese society, is that we have not redefined ourselves in contemporary society. We have abdicated our responsibility. Yes, historically there's an explanation for it, but it's not an excuse. The education, the tools, the technology is available for us to change it. Perhaps the older males in society, like myself, have not been sufficiently involved in trying to mentor. I certainly think we have to do a lot more mentoring, but I think long before we get there, we have to redefine the role of the African male. And what has happened now, and this is based to a large extent on the fact that our women have always been the bedrock of our community. They've always been successful. And now, financially, intellectually, in every sphere of endeavor, African females have outstripped the African male by at least twice. So what now happens is the African male has, if he felt any responsibility before, he's now, he thinks, well, look, forget it, there's nothing I can do, and he's abdicated this. It's inexcusable. And he, at best, is a sperm donor. And we do have to address that, because the role that we should be playing in the community, we don't. How many African families are together, work together, move through the society, and that is a challenge. And the issue, of course, is that all these very successful African ladies who raise sons, we have to make sure that what they're putting in the head is appropriate and equips him to deal with the challenges, because coming from the slave plantation, coming all the way through colonialism, everything has been stacked against him, and like I said, that's an explanation. But we've reached a stage, I think, where it's no longer an excuse, and we have not faced the challenge. The question is, how do we face it now? I think there's a lot of work going on. There's certainly a lot of, I think, useful conversation taking place. This program, I hope, is one of those. But there's a lot of conversation taking place, but we need to bring this together so that we extract very quickly, because this is a real crisis. This is not a crisis that can wait in another generation. We've already lost, I would say, 2.5. So we need to extract from that those founding principles that kept our family units together, that kept our communities together, that kept our villages together, that would keep us together nationally, as part, of course, of a Guyanese society, so that the unit, which starts at home, is a successful unit, and the male assumes the responsibility which he has abdicated for so long. Okay. And the difficulty he faces is the woman is no longer waiting on him, which they shouldn't. So we have a lot of work to do.
Okay, thank you, Nigel. Do you think that the problems that you've each identified that black males are facing in the Guyanese society are reflections of the systems and institutions by which they are governed, the systems that they are forced or encouraged to live under?
Yes, if I may speak first. We must remember that coming out of slavery, even after winning the freedom, you had a period of what is called amelioration. And then even when the Africans sought to get together and to get into economics, because economics govern life, and this is where the African male and female must recognize that there was the sabotage, the flooding of the lands, and all the different things that occurred. And then let's not remember the peoples who came. That's how we had the indentured servants. They came specifically to buffer the African male success and female. So the system indeed is stacked against us, and as Rastafari, we sing about the system all the time, burning spirit, the system, the system, the system. However, the African male and female must learn to rise above. And how can he or she rise above that? Education remains the key. And this is where our former leaders, more so Lyndon Forbes, Samson Burnham, would have focused on the higher self, meaning that he recognized the importance of an education. He sought to promote that in everything that he pushed the nation to do. Some may argue that he made some mistakes along the way, as every leader does. However, we cannot not recognize the fact that under his leadership, Guyana was known as the most literate nation in the Caribbean. So we as a community have to promote the education of the male. And what do we educate him to do? Let me tell you what I've taught my son. Your power to impregnate does not mean that you abuse that power. So at 21, he said yesterday someone wished him Happy Father's Day and got very surprised when he said, I'm not the father's yet. So I said, how did you feel? He said, Mom, I felt okay because I know that what you have taught me, if I'm going to be a dad, I must be financially able as well as psychologically ready for that child that is going to come into the world, because the family remains the foundation. And if we are failing in the family, then we're going to fail in every other aspect of it. Families build business, family build communities, and they build successful countries.
I don't want us to get the idea that what we're saying here and some of these issues that affect the black African males in the Guyanese society are unique to the African male community. I think on the onset we need to say that. Also, I don't want it to be taken for the audience out there that we're suggesting that African males are themselves responsible for their condition. So I just want to first to say that. I think that yes, there are structural issues, there are institutional issues which contribute, there's socialization, which I mentioned before, the culture of machismo, the approach to masculinity issues, the way that we define masculinity in the Guyanese society, the expectations of man and the expectations of what it means to be a young man in the Guyanese society. You have to have a lot of women, you got to be promiscuous, you know, your money is for buying fancy things, it's not for saving and so on. You got to get a car, you don't really need a house. You know, these are not things that are only in the African community, right? But yes, structures and institutions contribute. Also, I think that we can't have the conversation about the situation of African males without talking about the state. And right now, we have, particularly in the news and whatever, the popular things are, people are looking at this commission of inquiry for Rodney, for example, right? And just as the arguments that are being made are that the state is responsible for the death of Rodney, we have to also extend that conversation, the state and Shaka Blair, the state and Damien Belgrave, the state and Colvin Harding. So when we look at the situation of African males, indeed, we have to look at the state as within the human rights context, as a as having a duty to protect citizens, as having a duty to ensure that there is a framework, that there is space for people to reach their full potential. And when the state fails to do that, when the state fails to ensure that there is an environment, a conducive environment for the development of people, any type of people, then yes, the state should also be held responsible.
Nigel, do you have comments?
I have a comment, and I'm going to have to break rank because I always support what he says, but I have a slight variation on that.
Okay.
Nicole's referred to education.
Yes.
My position on that is the philosophy, more than education, because if you go through the early part of the 20th century, education was a big thing for the African male. Of course, they had to leave the estates. They became policemen, they came into the civil service, and education was the key, because that is what our grandparents and great-grandparents told us. I think it's more important than that. What is the philosophy of the African Guyanese family that we're putting in the heads? And that is really, to me, the key. Because education is just one of the many things you can use. It's a tool. Unfortunately, I think our foreparents thought it was an end. And that is purely a product of the society they grew up in. Because the only way you could advance socially, the only way you could have advanced economically was through education. But what happened was we didn't realize that education was a tool. We thought it was the end. So the end was to go become educated. And if you became a lawyer or you became a doctor, or those were the prize professions at the time, you had arrived, quote unquote. Now the difficulty with that is if you arrive in that state as a doctor or a lawyer, and you figure you have arrived, then all you do is you be a doctor and a lawyer. If you don't have the underlying philosophy that says that really your purpose in life is beyond that, you have to make sure that the family unit, that the community, etc., grows, and so that the next generation leaves in a better position than you did. If you don't have that underlying philosophy, you can quite happily be extremely educated, and there's absolutely no shortage of quote-unquote educated persons from that era. Tons of them. I mean, they're guys that you would sit down and listen. Matter of fact, part of the reason that the whole independence movement captured everybody was because all the leaders in the Caribbean were extremely articulate. Burnham, Barrow, Williams. I mean, Williams was a doctor, one of the best historians we had. And we became fascinated with education as an end. Rodney, great historian. But if you don't have the philosophy as to what you do with education, then you run into problems, because you can arrive, quote unquote, educated. But if you don't have an underlying philosophy that this is really a tool to improve your your family in this generation, so the next generation is 10 steps beyond where you left them, and so you progress, there's a problem. So I hear the sister on education, but I think it's the philosophy.
Yes.
In relation to what my good friend said there, I understand that the system is against us. I understand that we live in a hostile time, but we have always lived in a hostile time. There is no time in the history of the African family in the Caribbean, since we were brought across the water, that it has not been hostile. My challenge is that we know this. This is not a crutch. This is not an excuse. And after 2.5 or 3 centuries of being here, we should be able to beat every challenge because we have a methodology to beat it. And the methodology mustn't be that, oh God, the system is against us. We expect that. I mean, if you say to your young people that the system is hostile, I mean, you're starting off at a defeatist position. And you can't do that. We know the system is hostile. Wherever you go in the Western world, the system is not geared to support you. We know that. The question is, how do you create a philosophy or advance a philosophy that allows you to succeed despite the system being against you? And we came through a great era in the 40s and 50s where just think about it. Burnham, young guy from Kitty, guys like my father, went up to England and they beat the English at their, whatever they're going, but they knew they were going to just take their education. That they had a philosophy about success. What happens now is that I find that we can always find a reason why something is not working. That's not the problem. The problem is we must always ensure that we beat the system. And I don't mean beat the system illegally, that we are successful in spite of the system. And therefore, when we have our successes, we change the system so the next generation does not necessarily have to go through the same challenges. However, we must not lose the lesson of the system. And I think part of the problem that we face today is that we put so much stake historically on state power, especially during the previous administration, I mean prior to 92. So that when state power was so essential to the African community, whether it's jobs in the civil service or wherever it was, when they lost it, they were at sea. And because there was no philosophy as to how to fight and how to survive in spite of your circumstances, then you sit down and of course, paranoia, economic challenges, you're going to start to say nobody loves me. That's the philosophy. I think we need to develop a philosophy or continue the philosophy that we know that the system is not there for us, but we will be better than the system. We will always be the best. Because if you don't start with that philosophy, you're already in second place. And you can only get third and fourth. You have to start with the philosophy. I mean, when did the war end? I'm sounding old. Second World War ended in 1944. There was no Jewish state. We understand the difficulties with the Jewish state and the way they treat the Palestinians, but imagine moving from a group of persons scattered throughout Europe, bound only by religion, and in some cases race, to creating a state. Now, we don't agree with what it does in terms of Palestine, but just as a philosophy of success, a philosophy of survival, a philosophy of ensuring that the next generation, which is really what this is about, how do we ensure that the next generation, Nicole's next generation, his brother's next generation, start at a higher and better position than the previous one? And we have to have those benchmarks. So yes, I understand. I don't expect the present system to help me. I mean, we know that. It's like, what else do you expect? Guyana is the way it is. We'd like to change it to make it somewhere better, but don't lament where it is, because we know it's been like this. There's nothing that happens now that we couldn't predict. And if we can't predict it, it means we're failing. It means we're failing to anticipate the challenges we're going to face. So, yes, I hear the system is against us, and I know that. My philosophy is we have to be better than that. We have to take that into account.
I just want to quickly say, though,
Sure.
because I don't think we're saying different things. But I still believe, though, that there has to be, it is not, we have to empower young people and young men to take on that system and to achieve fundamental change. Even in a system that is screwed up, even if the system is working against us.
And that's the philosophy.
Sure, that we pursue the best ideals, and that is good. But also, I don't think that the message should ever be that we settle for the system and we believe that we can succeed even in the system. That the system needs fundamental change, and through our philosophy, I can borrow that from you, that we pursue excellence, which can also mean fundamental change in the system. We have to take on ideas of masculinity, we have to take on ideas of success, we have to take on, because, you know, and I just want to put one example, because this guy Will Johnson is working on this cultural policy thing that he's doing. He's just got a big grant from Dutch and so on to do it. And one of the challenges is that in the past 3 decades, since the 1970s, there has been no significant investment in the arts. My point is that the state has a role, because we're an organized society. The state has a role as a duty bearer in relation to human rights issues. And the state, as the dispenser of our collective contributions, has also responsibility to ensure that there is that monies and the fair share of the pie, let's say, goes also to the African community, and that includes the African male community.
Okay.
We're not at cross purposes, because my point wasn't that the state shouldn't do that, but I'm saying we shouldn't wait on the state to do it. We need to fight to change it, but don't let that fight consume us completely. That was really the point I was making.
The point I was trying to make here, and that's okay.
The men dominating.
I love the
not right.
philosophy. I love the philosophy,
Yes.
and the philosophy has to be family. The family system has to be so strong that it can stand and withstand the pressure from every other system. You see, family is integral to what we're facing, and we are failing at that fundamental level. And who lies at the heart of that family? The African woman. She gives birth. She socializes. What type of socialization is she giving? What is she teaching the African male? That is critical. In my role as an African woman teaching my son, I know that I'm responsible for what he's going to do and where he will end up by what I've been able to impart to him. So I've said to him over and over, family planning is key. And every Sabbath we would have this discussion. It doesn't matter how much you think I was preaching on him. On one day he's talking to his friends and he said, "Boy, you don't know about family planning. Family planning is key." And I said, okay, my work is done. Because I recognize he understood now what I was trying to tell him in planning his family, and not because he has the power to impregnate means that he will stud. Because remember what happened to the African male? He was the stud. That's what he was used for in slave plantation. And some will argue today that that even though the physical chains have been removed, we're still in a form of mental slavery.
Okay. Thank you all. Viewers, you are watching African Drums, and we are discussing the condition of African males in Guyanese society. At this time, I take the opportunity to let our viewers on the West Coast know that Cuffy 250 will be coming to your area. On Sunday, July 6th, we will be holding an emancipation forum on the state of African Guyanese. Mark the date, it's Sunday, July 6th. Speakers will include one of our current guests, Mr. Nigel Hughes, as well as Dr. David Hinds and others. Please spread the word, and we'll be taking a short break now. Please stay tuned.
Don't have enough subjects to get into university? Don't worry. The Critchlow Labour College is offering the Certificate in Industrial and Social Studies for less than $1,500 per week. And we have a payment plan to make the one-year course affordable. This certificate qualifies you to enter the Social Science faculty at UG, Cyril Potter College of Education, and other institutions of higher learning. You need to enroll now. Get your application forms from the Critchlow Labour College. Register now. The course will be Mondays through Thursdays from 5:15 to 9 p.m. Telephone 226-2483.
This is Roll Call.
Welcome to African Drums. If you are just joining us, we are discussing the condition of African males in the Guyanese society. I am Elsie Harry, and our able panelists are Norwell Hinds, Nicole Cole, and Nigel Hughes. Just before we went on break, we were discussing the problems that African males face. And while we understand that the system is putting a lot of pressure on these males, our panelists have let the viewers know that the males should not settle for this kind of problem at the expense, well, they're at the expense of this. They should not allow the state to overcome them. They should rise above. And before the break, Nicole made an interesting point that the families are important. But whenever we discuss the state of African males, there is the discussion of, have African males abandoned their responsibilities to their families? So that is the question that I want to ask.
I would like the males to go first.
All right, well, I'll start.
Moving targets.
Yeah. Has the Guyanese African male, Guyanese black African male, abandoned his responsibility to the family? You know, and in the earlier segment we talked a lot about socialization, we talked a lot about pressures in the society, and I think this is where Nigel's earlier point is particularly applicable. When we talk about developing for ourselves in the society now a shared philosophy of success, and also a rhetoric of success. What does success for the African male mean, and what should it mean? I don't know if I can make that judgment as to whether the African man has abandoned his responsibility. I think that what we find happening in a society, when you look beyond what you read in the papers, you hear a lot of struggles, you hear a lot of challenges, a lot of issues, you hear a lot of misdirection. That philosophy that Nigel alluded to is absent, and somehow the African man in the African community, in the African family, has not been able to organize himself individually and collective to take on some of the challenges that he faces. There are a lot of pressures, and I think what has happened too in terms of how the economy has been evolving, we have moved away from agricultural-based economy, particularly in African communities, in African villages. We're trying to return to that. A lot of young men, young boys are going into the interior. They're finding easy money, fast money. This has put a strain on the family itself. Also, there are many challenges with going into the interior itself. There are a lot of risks with doing the job itself. A lot of families have young men that have gone out to sea. These are some of the practical everyday challenges that Nicole Cole, I'm sure, knows a lot about, because she might hear them a lot coming to the commission. You know, a lot of these young men are incarcerated and so on. So I think that I don't know if I want to make that judgment as to whether the African male has abandoned his responsibility, but I do believe that yes, that it is time that we begin to articulate a shared philosophy and a rhetoric of success.
Nigel?
I think Norwell put it well when he says we're not sure if they have abandoned it.
Mm-hmm.
But the statistics clearly, I think, support the fact that we have failed. Whether that failure is a result of us abandoning it or other reasons, it is clear that the African male Guyanese has failed the African family. I think the statistics on the people in prison, the statistics on employment rates, the statistics on self-employment, business, professions, etc., etc. I think a lot of those statistics will say that there is failure. I don't know if the failure, I like Norwell, I am very hesitant to say that failure is a result of a conscious abandonment of the responsibility. But the fact is, whatever we're doing or not doing, we are feeling that family unit. And therefore we're feeling the community, we're feeling the village, and of course on a national level we are feeling. Now, failure is not a word I like to use, because then everybody tries to beat you up with it.
Yes.
We have to find a way to redirect and reorient and restructure the family unit so that everybody understands that it is critical for moving forward. We don't have that. No economic opportunities, whether they be in the interior, whether they be offshore or wherever, they're going to always have an impact on what happens in the community. But I believe that we have to find a different way. Absolutely have to find a different way. And I think we need to dig deep. When I came in the conversation, you were referring to the fact that our ancestors were able to come off the slave plantation. It wasn't just the fact that they were able to buy cash these plantations, but of course they organized themselves to operate at a village level, to operate their communal lands, and to operate their own individual plots. So there must have been a philosophy of success. Now, what we don't discuss as much is where did that change? I understand the challenges they faced with the flooding of the fields, etc., but somewhere along the line, we lost that drive to make sure that the next generation was better, and we have to go back there. So I wouldn't say necessarily they're abandoning, because I think if you had a heart-to-heart with most young people, the males, they would want, ideally, in the ultimate situation, to have a unit function, but for whatever reason, I know I'm not specifically answering it, but I don't think they have necessarily, I wouldn't go as far as saying they have abandoned it, but the results are not particularly, they're not happy.
Okay. I'm going to be the brave one and say yes. There has been some abandonment, and the statistics don't lie. The predominant family form is the single-headed household run by the female. Having said that, again, I lament that slavery has left an indelible mark. Remember, this is what has happened to the African family coming through here. But that doesn't mean that they cannot rise above. For the African female left alone to raise, especially raising the African male, she must not think that she can do it alone. Raising an African male is no easy task, girl, I can tell you. And if that dad is not playing the role, then she must reach out. Who does she reach out to? Someone mentioned earlier, mentorship. Mentoring is a philosophy we would like to adopt. Get males who are upstanding, get males to talk, because males face issues that they don't necessarily discuss with the woman. And so when my son was going through his issues as a teen, I got males to talk to him, because he wasn't talking to me. I'm not a man, and that meant that I don't have a penis, huh? And so I couldn't understand what he was going through, and so he wanted to have a man to talk to, and I got males to talk to him. And this is how we're going to help. You see, the African male cannot do that which he has not been taught. We would like them to be breadwinners, but how can you win the bread if you haven't been taught to win the bread? So he is just replicating a cycle. Who's there to teach him? There are many males who are very, very emotional, that they don't know their dads. They try to seek them out, and they themselves struggle with fatherhood because they didn't know their fathers. And we socialize sometimes our boys to not feel pain. So we tell them if they cry, they're being a girl and they must not cry. But men are emotional and they feel pain. I've read a book, From Angry Boys to Angry Men, and we must allow as mothers to have our boy, if he's feeling the pain, to cry. There's absolutely nothing wrong. My son went to his best friend, got lashed in his head at his school, and he died. And he was and I said to him, I said, if you want to cry, you cry, because it's a way of getting rid of all what you're feeling. There's absolutely nothing wrong in crying, and you're not a girl because you cry. So we must learn how to raise that male, and love is the solution. We need to be more loving, and we need to raise them with love. And don't tell me that too much love is spoiling them. At every tier we need love. And if we look at Maslow's hierarchy of needs, the basic need tier is there, but in the middle of that is love and belonging. Our boys need to feel that they love and belong. The incident that happened in Agricola, I wrote about it. And I asked the police if their only approach was to go and shoot the black male, because that appears to be their only approach. They don't do it to any other male. You check that out. That's where the system, I believe, is still in the slavery. When what happened to Colin Harding, Alex Griffith. All right, these are. It's just the systemic, the stereotyping of the African male, and the fact that no good can come of him. So we as the women have a lot to do, and we have been doing a lot. Yes, we have been successful in achieving academically, but where the philosophy needs to go is that we must achieve in the family, raising those children to face the challenges that we are being faced with. And in the absence of your dad, don't tell yourself you can do it alone. Please get mentors.
Okay, so you've noted that majority of the single parent families are headed by females.
Oh, yes.
Do you think that black females have become so frustrated with black males that they've given up on them?
Yes, I've heard so many different stories of the black female saying that the black man is no good, he's no this, and I would be very quick to say that we must remember what has happened to him and not be so quick to cast him aside, that there's still good in him. We must want to work the long hours. You see, good doesn't just come overnight. It takes time. And so if you're going to build something, then you have to have the patience, the courage, the tolerance. Frustration is easy, but when you see the black male succeeding, then everybody wants to get with him, right? Everybody loves Usain Bolt. Oh yes, he's fast, he's good, he can Michael Jordan, and I can call more successful black males, Eddie Grant, Nigel Hughes here. You know, the girls love him too, huh? And
I don't know about that, but anyway.
and so Norwell too. When the African male is successful, the ladies gravitate, but that success comes through hard work. You cannot have a loving African male if he wasn't raised by loving women. You see why Nigel is loving? The women behind him is responsible for who he is. The same thing here with Norwell. Loving women will raise loving men. So I am now bringing the ball into the court of the women, and where we must do our part to instill that which is right for our boys and to teach them what is right. I can remember my son friends asking him, so what happened, boy, you bringing home no girls? And he said, not with my mother, not with she at all. Because I said to him that, again, your power to impregnate doesn't mean that you abuse it. So you know what that means? I don't want him out there impregnating all, because I taught him, do you know who go to court for child support? He said, who, Mom? I said, the male. All right, and so part of the philosophy is that we must raise socialization of the boy child and the girl must be that different. And love is the key. Love is the best medicine that can heal and transform a human soul.
Okay. Norwell.
One thing I want
sure,
to add,
Nigel.
I'm really happy that Nicole mentioned some aspects of that, because the men who are brought up in single parent homes are obviously brought up by women. But more importantly, we don't equip our men to deal with success. So yeah, when they get there, and then of course you're gonna have all the girls and stuff, you say Bolt, what have you. If we don't equip, and we notice this in Guyana, if we create a champion and he makes some money,
Yes.
it's gone, literally gone in less than 4 years.
Andrew Six said Lewis.
I don't want to call names. No, the issue is, it means that we are not training our people to be able to handle modest success. Because if you get modest success and squander it, and that comes primarily because you don't have the philosophy of always wanting to improve, if we're not equipped to allow them to deal with those circumstances, then we're going to end up always remaining where we are. And so I think the imagery of success, and certainly the benchmarks of success, have to be changed. I think a lot of guys think that, hey, when I make it, I got 2 cars, I got 15 women, how many child models. That has to change.
Yeah.
Because to me, that is not a sign of success. Because if you get there, you get the prize money, you don't invest it, you got a problem. You got to look at people like Michael Jordan. And there are lots of images. Unfortunately, most, I don't want to say unfortunately, a lot of them come out of sport. But we need images of success in economics, who we celebrate. We need images, well, we've got a lot of images of success in academia, but we need them to be outside. Because you see, the thing about sport is that sport is quote unquote for TV sexy. You know, you got the athletes, they're doing this stuff, and naturally what comes with that is all the trappings of fancy car, bling, women, what have you, which is not necessarily always the best image you want to portray. You need the images of success economically, you need the images of success socially, you need the images of success. I mean, Obama, whatever your views on his politics or whatever your views on his economic policy, Obama has that image. And you need more of that in Guyana, because you don't see, we don't see several images of African units that are successful. Not that they're not there, we just don't see them. Every time you see an image of a young African male, he either got shot by the police, arrested, the women crying outside the prison, because subconsciously, that's what people read, you know, people gravitate towards that. So the other images just don't exist. And we have to change that. You the people in the media, have to change that, because otherwise you keep selling this negativity, people are going to start to live the negativity, and it's a problem. Now we know crime as a result of the people who we see in the newspapers, the killing and the kidnapping. The crime ain't got race in Guyana. It used to be the position where you thought, hey, the only people who commit violent crimes were African males. That is not so. Partly because of the press, you see now that crime is a national problem. It does not have race. The people who kidnap, rob, can come from any community. So we have a national problem. Before, our approach used to be very sectoral. You know, it's an urban African problem. So if you're not affected by it, you don't deal with it. Now we know that we have a real serious problem in crime, irrespective of race, equal opportunity. Crime is now fully equal opportunity. And so, as much as it is negative, I am happy it's now equal opportunity, because we can deal with the issues. We can begin to deal with the issues rather than saying it's a black problem or it's an Indian problem. We can start dealing with those issues as a national problem, which is, I think, what Oral was saying. Nationally we have to deal, because you can't run a country, you can't have a community if one part is not well and you overlook it or you pretend it doesn't exist.
Okay. Norwell, you are a young male professional.
Young. Thank you.
You're welcome. How does society view you? What are some of the trials that you face personally? What are some of your triumphs?
Okay. Well, first, I'm glad that Nigel made the point he just made, because I was going to make it. I would hate for the young man who's looking the show, or even the older man who's looking the show, to think that we're saying here that he who go out there every day, get whatever labor job he can get just to bring in some food, if he could borrow 1,000 here, borrow 1,000 there, that he is not successful. I'd hate for him to think that. So I'm glad that Nigel made that point, that oftentimes we present the African male very negatively, and we present him as a failure. But the African man is under pressure, and we have to face that. He's under tremendous pressure in the Guyanese society, and the African man is trying the way he knows. And I think Nicole made the point that you can only do it the way you know.
Yes.
And the point is that we have to learn, and we have to teach, and we have to move towards other ways to do it. And that's a community responsibility. The African community has that responsibility. So I'm glad that that point was made. Myself personally, some of the challenges I've had, well, I would say in first off, I am a product of a single parent family, and it wasn't just one woman that raised me, it was a group of women. It was my aunt, it was my mother, my aunts. I've got many aunts, many aunts, and each one of them had a hand. My mother, who is now passed away, women like Miss Patrice Lafleur, who's not biologically related to me, but she was a mentor to me and gave me my first job opportunity, and she's the assistant rep for UNFPA. And other women, even Miss Baffet Chan, who was a GRP and so on, who's, you know, sort of guided. So I've been the product of women to a large extent. I say that to say also that I've also been, that I've also seen the African man in my own family struggle. But I look at my brother, who didn't have no fancy education, but who works hard, who has been working hard, and who continues to ensure that he prepares and he gets for his children, and he has that vision of success for his children. So For me, I would say that the African man and young African men and young professionals have to begin carving a space for themselves and carving their new vision, their vision of the Guyanese society. And that means that we have to begin articulating our set of values for what the future should look like. Incidentally, tomorrow is the Day of the African Child, the 16th, and there's a conversation they're going to be having that's going to be on education for all, and we define education very broadly. And I think that that part of that has to be, how do we educate for economic success? How do we educate for social success? How do we educate for professional success? How do we educate for relational, for success, interpersonal success? So I would say that that is a major challenge for us going forward, ensuring that we define education in that broader sense and begin to articulate a set of values.
Okay. Nigel, you are a father. We've heard from women, we've heard from everyone what is their opinion of what is the role of the father. But I want to know from you, what is the role of the father in correcting some of these deficiencies that these young African males face?
Well, I would have thought his role is primary. Primarily because you're dealing with African males. I mean, you got to be the role model. You've got to ensure that you, first of all, articulate a philosophy. Going back to my original point,
yes.
I really believe you do have to articulate a philosophy of how you're going to always be able to deal with any situation in the society. Norwell has coined it the philosophy of success. I was extremely privileged as a child. I will admit that at the drop of a hat. I had fantastic parents. I went to privileged schools. And I am indebted to them forever for having afforded me the opportunity of that privilege. I tend to take the philosophy that my father, with adaptations for contemporary society, instilled in us, which is that you are always going to face difficulties in life, but it is your mind and your philosophy of having to succeed that will make it. I think a lot of his drive came from the fact that a lot of people, I was actually saying to that to Norwell and Nicole during the intermission, a lot of the people who are successful in Guyana came from a base. And I think a lot of that was driven by the fact that they came to Georgetown where they met hostility and they met people who thought that they were from the country or whatever. And they have been successful across the board racially because there were no odds. They never thought that they were in a position of advantage, and there was no challenge that was ever too large for them. And I think once you can instill into your children that philosophy that they must succeed, but more importantly that your generation must leave this planet and leave the offspring at least 10 paces ahead of where your parents left you, then I think you're on the right path. The jury's still out on us. I mean, working on it. But the point is, I think that is the underlying philosophy you have to, and you have to be able to equip them to deal with difficult circumstances any part of the world, because the reality of the world is, it's not the Caribbean. You may be placed, you may live in Saudi Arabia, you may live in Bosnia, wherever you live, unless you have an approach to life that is born out of the necessity to be successful, not successful taking advantage of other people, just the philosophy of advancing yourself and your family and your community, I think it will go a long way to moving us forward. And I think that's primarily the role of the father. And of course, in contemporary society, you like to say that the family should have joint leadership between the woman and the man.
Yes.
I think we need to redefine that role, because the women have demonstrated, certainly in the African community, women have demonstrated repeatedly from the first time they came here and shared slave ships, that they can lead an African family. So we have no difficulty with the ability of the African woman to lead. So in terms of the nuclear family, I think that leadership has to come out of joint decision-making, joint leadership, because in the new world in which we live, it's no longer the macho male must always be responsible. We have to combine that. And what has happened is that we, the males, have abandoned that position. now I'm saying abandoned. We, the males, have not been there.
That's fine.
And we need to reinsert ourselves so that the success comes out of that.
Okay, as we conclude the conversation, we've alluded to the fact that the things that can be done to help the situation of the black males in society are education, mentorship, redefining your philosophy. But what else can be done, and who needs to do these things? Do the males need to do these things for themselves? Does the society need to come on board? The women, who?
Well, Nicole started the program, and it's best that she ends.
Just before Nicole ends, I think hard work in the community, in the schools, we have to do it. There's no, for me, there's no shortcut. We have to get into the schools, preferably the primary schools, and start speaking to young people in the villages. It's great to talk nationally and do this in the newspaper. The real work has to start in primary schools. You got to catch them at 3.5 when they get into the primary schools, so that they understand from then the philosophy. That's just my 2 cents.
Thanks.
Just to say that I'm going to reinforce, and Nigel spoke about where he came from and how privileged he was to go to good schools. That's family. Again, I cannot stress more the importance of having a strong family unit. When you have a strong family unit, then you can self-actualize. At the highest peak of the tier of Maslow's hierarchy of needs is self-actualization. How do you get there? You get there when your basic needs are met, then you have love and belonging, and then you self-actualize. For most of our African males, they're stuck at the basic needs. Some don't feel as though they love and belong, and this is where we as a community have to make them feel love and belong. Father's not there, mentorship is important. Having times where you go in, I like the approach of the community outreaches. This is important because remember who started the village movement? It's the Africans. The greatest local government system in this country was started by us and our ancestors. We need to return to that. They left a legacy for us to follow, and I work with a group of women, and this year I've been teaching them to return to the village movement. You can't have land in your yard and tell me you're hungry. Plant. Where are your beds? Grow food, not only flowers, so that you can go to the backyard and get something there. And you must have an economic plan. You must have an education to come out and create your business, entrepreneurship. Cannot have an education only to say, oh, I'm just going to come and go look for jobs. No. You have to create niche markets for yourself and to be successful. And I love Bob Marley. When one door is closed, another is open. And so he asked the question, would you make the system make you hate your brother man? Would you make the system make you kill your brother man? And he said, no, dread, no. So we don't want that. We want to have that love and commune. So if you have something that you can share, bless someone. Don't keep it all for yourself.
Thank you, Norwell, Nicole, and Nigel for being on African Drums. Viewers, thank you for staying with us. Please be reminded that on Sunday, July 6th, Cuffy 250 will be holding an emancipation forum on the state of African Guyanese in the West Coast. Please make special efforts to be there. Also, please like our Facebook page, Cuffy 250, and subscribe to our YouTube channel, Cuffy 250. Please donate to the cause and send us an email, cuffy250gy@gmail.com. Thank you for staying with us. I am Elsie Harry. Please join us next week.